Hey folks, welcome back. This is Joel, and we will continue with our discussion on VMware networking. To be more specific, in the previous set of videos, we have talked about a couple of different ways of creating a home lab. Right? We talked about using EVE-NG. You can go down to my channel and you'll see a playlist for VMware, and you will see the first two videos where I talk about creating a lab on EVE-NG. In the last video, which is the standard switches, right? VMware standard switches, I showed you that there is another way of creating a lab on your laptop, which is using hypervisor like VMware Fusion or Workstation, right? So you can see a very simple lab here. I have 3 hosts and I have a Ubuntu server which is acting as a iSCSI storage here. We haven't discussed much on the iSCSI, or we haven't discussed much on the storage side yet. Maybe in future we will, but it's not very relevant to our discussion today. But I just wanted to let you know of the whole situation here, right? The whole network which we have. That being said, let me just also, I have a very rough diagram. I'm terrible with my drawings, but I have a very rough diagram of what we have as of today, what we will try out today, and what will be our final goal, what we'll achieve in this particular video. So that being said, give me a second. So let me explain about the topology which we have at hand. So what you see here are 3 different, you see the 3 boxes here. These are nothing but, so in this video, obviously we'll be using 2 of the ESXi hosts, right? If you see my Ubuntu, sorry, if you look at my VMware Fusion, you can see 1 and 2. Only these 2 are powered on. I've turned off the third one, which I don't really need in this video. So we'll be using 2 hosts to be specific, right? This one and this one. And the third host is obviously the Ubuntu server, which is the iSCSI storage, right? So actually this doesn't make sense. So probably let me just get rid of that. I think this, this is basically a Ubuntu, it's a Ubuntu Ubuntu server which is acting as a iSCSI storage. So it's nothing but another VM, and which is running. So these are like 3 VMs. I'm running 1, this 2, and this 3. So these are 3 VMs which I'm running on my MacBook, right? MacBook Fusion. But in a traditional topology, in a lab, or in a production network, you're going to obviously have a physical switch, right? You probably won't be running it on a MacBook you won't be running it on a laptop. It will be an actual data center where this particular section is going to be an actual physical switch. Anyway, so that being said, so we have 3 hosts, right? And forget about the Ubuntu server for now. Like I said, it's just there for iSCSI storage, so it's not very relevant to our discussion. Now, when you look at these 2 hosts, you've got ESXi 1 and 2. Now on the ESXi 2, or I'm gonna just call this as host 2. On host 2, we really don't have any VMs, right? We just have the 2 standard switches which we created in the previous video. We have the vStandard switch 0 and vStandard switch 1. I believe in the previous video I also did the VMware Fusion. I actually migrated one of the VM from here to here, but I believe after recording the video I kind of migrated the VM back here. So as of now, when you're seeing the video, you'll probably not find any VMs running on the host 2, right? There's nothing. There's just 2 networking switches, which is standard switches, right? They are present here, and everything is basically happening on my host number 1, right? And there are 2 important things. One is there is a firewall, right? The FW basically represents a firewall. So there is a firewall VM, and then the vCenter VM also is running on this guy itself, on the ESXi host. And there are 2 switches, which is VS0 and VS1, right? The VS1 is mainly catering to the WAN side, right? To connect the firewall to the WAN. That is a whole need for that guy. Whereas, the virtual switch 0 is mainly catering to the LAN side, right? All the management, all of the traffic is flowing through the VS0. Similarly, you have the vCenter, and vCenter just has one connectivity, I believe, to the vSwitch 0, right? Again, for the management purpose. And the firewall is kind of configured in my topology to be like the default gateway and the DNS resolver and so on, right? So every single VM in my network will reach out to the firewall and then go out into the internet, or will talk to the rest of the network. So firewall is kind of like configured to be the default gateway as of now. So this is a very simple topology we have here, right? I'm pretty sure you can probably build even more cool and fun stuff, but this is a very simple topology which we have. And now coming to this particular video, right? What is this video about? So in the previous video we talked about one type of switch, which was the standard switch. So in this video we will actually get into, we just grab that. Okay, so in this video we will actually get into what we call as the distributed switch, right? And that's why I have drawn a section at the top here, right? The main difference between the standard switch and the distributed switches, if you see here, in standard switch they are isolated to that box, right? Or they are kind of attached to that specific EXXI, right? If you here you have two switches, but they are managed, they are configured, their control plane, data plane, management plane, everything resides inside this host. They don't have any relevance outside the host. Similarly, if you go to another host, you have to again create the same switches, and you have to create the same you have to create the same switches, you have to create the uplinks, you have to create the port groups, everything individually again on the other host as well. So this really doesn't scale, right? If you have like a lot of hosts and a lot of VMs, it's very difficult to create all these switches individually on every single host. I mean, they do the job for you, but at the same time, it's too much manual work. So that's where VMware came up with this another concept of switch, another virtual switch, and that's what we call as the distributed vSwitch, right? Distributed VMware switch. And what they have done different with this is they have kind of broken the management plane and the data plane. The data plane would still reside here, right? It will still reside on your EXXI, but here the management plane will basically reside here on the vCenter. So that's the cool thing which they have come up with. So which means now what I can do is, if you observe my coloring mechanism here, so the green part, right, which is here, this is the D switch or the distributed switch, and you can see how it is spanning across the host, right? So it's basically going to be one big switch which can kind of like mimic the functionalities of every single of these individual switches which would have been configured individually on each of the hosts, right? But that doesn't mean that the forwarding of the packet is done by the vCenter. No, the forwarding, the data plane is still on the ESXi host. This is just think of it like VSS in case of Cisco, right? If you are familiar with stacking, or if you are familiar with forget stacking, the VSS, the traditional CAT VSS, right? Virtual switching, virtual switch system, right? So what you do over there is you combine multiple switches, right, into one single management plane, so that it's easier to manage, it's easier to configure, right? And by doing this, it's really useful because now you just need to configure one distributed switch, and you can push, once you configure that switch, the corresponding configs obviously gets pushed onto the host, and all the policies and all of that can be configured centrally, right? So just you do anything to the D switch here, and the corresponding policies, everything gets pushed down to the corresponding host at the bottom. So that is the main significant, or that's the main significant difference between your distributed switch and the standard switch. Standard switch is bound to the corresponding EXXI host where it is defined, whereas distributed switch is something which where they have divided the management plane and the data plane. So all the configuration, monitoring, managing, everything you do on the vCenter, and the data plane is basically still on the EXXI host, right? So that being said, let's what we are going to do in this video is, I'm not going to blindly just create a D switch. What I'm going to do is, we are going to migrate from this scenario where, in fact, we are going to migrate this specific switch, right? That's why you can see me colored, I have colored something in yellow here, right? There's yellow over here and yellow over here. So what we are going to do is, we are going to migrate this firewall, okay? So we are going to migrate this firewall into a different host. In this case, we are going to migrate it to EXXI. But before migrating, what we are going to do is, we are going to also migrate not just a VM, but we are also, migrating VM is pretty easy, right? We can do it using vMotion. But before migrating the VM, I'm going to migrate the networking construct as well, which means I'm going to migrate from the standard switch to the distributed switch, which means there are going to be a bunch of steps involved, right? So I'll have to first create the distributed switch on the other, I'll have to create it on the vCenter. So I'll have to create the distributed switch, and then I'll have to put the host in the maintenance mode, and then I'll have to migrate the VM and then get the host out of the maintenance mode, right? So there'll be a lot of fun, cool stuff which we'll be doing here. But I hope this much is like clear, right? So where we are as of now we have standard switches on both of our EXXI hosts. What we intend to do, we intend to move away from standard and migrate to a distributed switch, right? And once we migrate to the distributed switch, we also want to migrate our VM, which is currently housed on a standard switch, to another host where we are going to have that particular VM moved to the distributed switch. So that's what we are going to do. And let me grab my screen here, give me a second. Alright, so we are here right now on my EXXI, but let me go to my vSphere. Right, so this is my vSphere. You can see two of the hosts here, and if you probably click on any of the hosts, we should see the VMs under it, right? And again, bear with me, all my VMs are pretty slow because I'm running it on my 16 GB laptop. So you can see both the VMs are here, right? My firewall is here and the vCenter is here on my EXXI host 1. We can also see the networking construct, right? We should be able to see these are the networking constructs, right, which we have. And what else do we want to see here? So let's see, let's go to the summary section. Do we want to see anything over here? It's a bit slow, bear with me. And I just want to make sure that I show you everything as of now, as of the current situation of the lab, and then where we will end up with once we once we create the distributed switch, right? All right, so as you see here, this is my current state. So this is on my EXXI 1. You can see that we've got the vSwitch 0 and vSwitch 1, right? These are the two switches, but at the end of the video, you will see me having one more switch here, which will be the distributed switch, and everything from the vSwitch 0 would have been migrated to that guy, right? So that's what we are intending to do. So let's get started. So let's go to the inventory of the networks, which is the the fourth option here on the right. So once you see here, you see these are the various networks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and say right click here, and let's say create a new distributed switch here. There you go. So I'm going to create a new distributed switch. So it's asking for the name. I'm going to keep the default name. That's fine. Next, it's going to ask me for the version of the switch. I'm going to use the latest, which is 7.0. Right, and it's going to ask me the number of uplinks, right? The number of uplinks needed for my distributed switch. So the concept is still going to remain the same. I mean, you're going to have the port groups, you're going to have the uplinks for your distributed switch as well, right? Because obviously without uplinks, you'll not be able to connect to the real outside world, right? So think of distributed switch as nothing but same as the standard switch, but rather it just extends across all the hosts, right? Just think of it that way. It's very easier to remember that way. So we will go back and we will look at the number of uplinks. Since we are migrating only the vSwitch 0, let's look at this. So vSwitch 0, we had 2 uplinks. So I'm going to just reuse those same uplinks for my distributed switch as well. So I'm going to say 2 here, and we are supposed to give a name for the port group, right? By default, it is going to take this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that to the port group which I have used in my, let's look at what is a port group. We can also look at the port group even from here as well, from the EXXI host as well. So you can see the port group which is active is this management port group, right? In fact, there are 2 port groups. One is management. This is the management of VMs, and this is the management network, which seems to be the port group for my EXXI host itself. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to create just one port group and combine both of these, right? So let's when I'm talking about distributed switch, so when I'm doing that, I'm going to create only one guy, which is D management, right? I'm going to put a D before every single name, so that makes that easier to distinguish later. So that's good. So we're going to click on next here, and this is going to ask me to finalize on everything. Looks good, so I'm going to say finish. So now that distributed switch would be getting created, right? So it will take some time. Here you go, the distributed switch got created, and you should see that on the left side. You can see the port group which we created, the D management has been created, right? But is that it? No. We also need to create the other port groups which were part of my standard switch, right? What were the port groups? We had port groups for DMZ, we had it for, you can see here for vMotion, we have iSCSI2, iSCSI1, right? And the management we have already taken care of. So we need another 4 port groups which we need to create. We are not going to do anything with vSwitch1. The vSwitch1 we are going to retain it as is. So we are not going to touch anything with the WAN side. We are just restructuring our vSwitch 0, and we are migrating the vSwitch 0 from a standard switch to a distributed switch. Cool. So that being said, let's get to work. So we are creating, like I said, we are creating the port groups to match with our existing standard. So let's go to my distributed switch here, and I'm gonna say create, right click and create new distributed port group, right? And here let's keep the names as simple as possible, right? So we will have to first create probably for DMZ. So it's DMZ here. So I'm gonna say DMZ, right? Let's put a D before everything. There you go. Next, and here we have to just put the VLAN number. So remember, in my DMZ I was tagging the traffic with VLAN 100. So I'm going to use the same thing here as well. There you go. And we're going to say next, and we're going to say finish. So we would have created a new port group now. We need to create 3 more. So let's do that. Port group, new port group, and this time we will go and create it for which one? We'll do for vMotion, right? So we'll say vMotion. I mean, you really don't have to give the same name. It's not compulsory, but I'm just doing it this way so that it's easier for us to understand the mappings later. So what is the VLAN ID for vMotion? It is 103. So let's use 103 here. I'm going to say next and finish. There you go. How many more left? I think couple more are there. So we will, what did we do just now? Okay, we got vMotion done. So let's go to another one, and let's add the iSCSI as well. So the iSCSI 1. So let's add this guy. So we'll say, okay, it's loading. See, you can see on the left hand side here, all the port groups which we are adding are basically showing up here. And we are basically trying to create a replicas or create the distributed port groups, right? Basically these ones. In my diagram, if you see the yellow section here, or the blue section here, the box which I have shown here, right? This is just one port group, and I have colored that to be in yellow color. Yellow is because I'm basically trying to replicate the port groups which were on the standard switch. I'm trying to replicate it on the distributed switch, so that's why I've colored it in yellow. But this is just representing one port group. Similarly, there are multiple port groups, and we are right now in the process of creating those, right? So I'm gonna say iSCSI 1. So let's remove the space here, and if I'm not wrong, the VLAN for iSCSI 1 was 101. So let's do that. So let's change the VLAN number here to 101. I'm gonna say next and finish. Okay, and the last guy left is, so let's do one more. So that's going to be your iSCSI 2. So let's get rid of that and 2. Okay, let's go to next, and I believe the VLAN here is 102. Finish. Alright, so we are done with the boring part of creating all the corresponding ports on the distributed switch, which is good. Okay, the next is what we'll do is this is something again which probably I have not covered in my video, but this could be something cool for you to explore as well. If you look at my topology, like I said, this Ubuntu server which is here is acting as my is basically acting as my iSCSI storage, right? So the two networks which I just now added, iSCSI 1 and 2, are basically for that, or the 2 port groups which I showed you just now. They are basically present on my switch to provide that storage connectivity, right? Now just to make sure that we have just to make sure that we have a good redundancy, so what I'm going to do is, this is something which might not be very relevant to this video, but it's good to get it out of the way. So I'm going to edit the settings here, right? So let's select on one of the iSCSI one. I'm going to say edit settings, right? So this, for this port group, it's a very good way to even look at port groups, right? The use of port groups. So you can see this is one of the main reason why people go for distributed switches, because you see the number of capabilities which the port groups gives you here are way more than what you would have seen in your standard switches, right? That being said, let's come to what we call as the steaming and the failover, right? And here right now you see there are two uplinks, right? So there are two uplinks which are being used for my iSCSI, but what I want to do is I want to kind of I want to use one of the uplink for iSCSI 1 and the other uplink for iSCSI 2, right? It's mainly for HA or redundancy kind of a concept. So I'm gonna push these guys down, so that way I am making the uplink 2 as unused. I'm using only uplink 1. I'm gonna say OK. Similarly, let's go and edit the settings for this guy. Let's wait for that. Like I said, it's a bit slow, but yeah, we'll have to bear with it. So we'll say edit settings. Okay, I think I clicked on something else. So yeah, there you go. So where is edit settings? Okay, edit settings, and we are on here. For this guy, what we'll make is we'll make the uplink 1 as the unused uplink. So we are basically using the uplink 2, right? So we have kind of changed the failover order so that each port group only sees one of the uplinks, right? So if you look at the diagram here, or maybe on the left hand side here, right? So, or let's go back here. So in the previous scenario also, I actually had something like that. You see the iSCSI 1 here was connected to one of the uplink, and the iSCSI 2 was connected to the other uplink. So I kind of wanted to replicate the same thing even in my distributed switch scenario, right? So iSCSI 1 is using one of the uplink, iSCSI 2 is using the second uplink. Alright, so that looks good. Next, what we do is, now we are getting closer to our final goal, which is, why are we even doing this? I mean, at the end of the day, once you create a distributed switch, you would want some VMs to use it, right? You would want some hosts to use it. So what we'll do is we are going to use the second host, and we are going to put it in the maintenance mode. So we'll go to the second host. So that's the main objective. The final outcome of this video is we want to migrate the VM from host 1 to host 2, right? So we'll go and first put the host 2 in maintenance mode, and then we are going to go and add the distributed switch to it. So let's pause and get that done with. All right, so here we are. Now, I mean, migrating the whole system, the whole VMware set of hosts, right, in one shot to distributed switch, it kind of, you might lose the connectivity, because your vCenter is also part of the EXXI, one of the EXXI hosts, right? So that's why we are doing this approach where we are migrating one host after the other. We are not migrating all the hosts in one single shot, right? And this is how you do it. So let's take this host 2 and let's enter it in the maintenance mode, right? So when you are in the maintenance mode, you really can't do anything on that host, right? So that's why we are basically moving it to the maintenance mode. So you can't spin up new VMs, you can't do any major activities on it, right? So let's wait for it to, okay, so I think there's an error. Let's try to fix that. Give me a sec. All right, so finally I managed to put the host in the maintenance mode, though I ended up using a different host because I think the EXXI 2 was taking a lot of time to come up. So I ended up putting this particular host, which is my host 3 in maintenance mode, and we can probably use this host for the rest of the video. So that being said, so we have put the host in the maintenance mode. So what we'll do next is we'll go to the network section, we'll go to our D switch, right? And what we have to do now is we have to add hosts to the distributed switch. So we're going to say add, and let's select the first option, which is add, right? So just recap till now what we have done. We have created the distributed switch. We have created the corresponding port groups on that particular distributed switch. We have put a particular host in a maintenance mode, right? That is the host onto which where we'll be migrating our VMs to, and we'll be migrating that whole host also to the D switch, right? So right now we are adding this particular host to the D switch. So I'm just gonna reference D switch, but what I actually mean is the distributed switch. Okay, so we're gonna say click next. Now we have to add host on the next screen, so let's wait for that. I think it's still not populated. Let's probably go back. Okay, click next. It's taking some time, give it a second. All right, so we are on this page now. So we are going to say add host. I'm going to say click on new host. We'll have to select the host number 3, right, because that's what we are trying to add, right? So let's go and click that. You can see it is in the maintenance mode right now. So we'll say okay, and we'll say next. Now the next part is very interesting, right? You see on the left hand side it is telling manage the physical adapter. So we are basically trying to now add the VM NICs, right? So the VM NICs which we'll be using is basically VM NIC 0 and VM NIC 1, right? So these are the two NICs which are currently actually on my vSwitch 0, but I want to migrate them from vSwitch 0 to distribution switch, right? So and the vSwitch 1, we are not playing around with it, we are not touching it, we are going to retain it, only these two switches. So I'm going to select this guy, I'm going to say assign uplink, right? So give it a second, there should be some more info which should get populated here. It's a bit slow, let me do that again. Okay, there you go. So it's loading now. So now I'm going to use uplink 1, right, on this guy. That's good. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do VM NIC 1. I'm going to click on assign uplink, and I'm going to use the uplink 2, right? So each of the, so there are two uplinks, right, which we actually configured when we set up the distributed switch, and I'm using each of my physical adapters to actually achieve that, right? To each of my two physical adapters, I'm connecting to each of the uplinks. Cool, so that's good. So uplinks is basically on your distributed switch, and VM NICs, this is currently on your standard switch. So I'm migrating. So you can see it will get migrated to this particular port group. Right now it is on the standard switch. So I'm going to say next. Right, so yeah, so the next is you see on the left hand side it is telling me we have to next add the VM kernel adapters. So we added the uplinks part of it, right? So if you look at the diagram here, we took care of the we migrated the uplink, which is the below ones, right? All these adapters. In fact, forget about the WAN, we just migrated the LAN side. Next is we have to add the kernel adapters. Okay, the kernel ones are not shown here. Ideally the kernel adapters will be here, right? Obviously somewhere over here, because the kernel adapters are basically assigned to the they are associated with the EXXI server, right? Mainly for vMotion, via management and all of that. So we are basically going to migrate those as well, or we are basically going to add those as well to the D switch. So that's the next step. Once this loads, I think we can go about that. All right. So on the VM kernel port, what we are going to do is we will select the first VM kernel port, right? You see here it is currently in the management network, part of the vSwitch. So I'm going to do the same task. I'm going to say assign port group, and I'm going to reassign this guy to the port groups which we just now created with our distribution switch here, right? So I'm going to select D management here. So you understand why I named it this way, because now it is useful for us, right? So I can similarly do this ISCSI, right? Let's assign this to the corresponding port group on my distributed switch as well, which is ISCSI 1. There you go. Let's do the next one, which is ISCSI 2, and okay, there you go, that is done as well. And the last one is the vMotion, so we'll do that. Awesome. So there you go. So we have reassigned all the ports, right, which were part of the standard switch to the corresponding port groups on the distributed switch. Cool. So we'll go to the next one now, which is the final step. So we are not going to migrate anything now. So we'll first finish off everything and then we'll migrate the VM, right? So for now, we don't have to do anything here. Let's go to the next one, and there you go, finish. Right? So now it looks good, and let's wait for this to complete. You can see at the bottom, it's trying to reconfigure the distributed switch. Meanwhile, let's go to the first and be ready, because what we'll be doing is we'll be migrating this guy, this firewall, right, which is currently, if you go to the EXXI host here, you see there are no VMs on this guy, right? On EXXI 3, there are no VMs. We can click on the networking and we should, I think, start seeing the distributed switch appear here. Let's check that out. See, there you go. We have the distributed switch appearing, and let's click on this guy. Right, there you go, right? All the port groups, which are the ones, the vMotion, the iSCSI, the management, all of them are visible here, right? Cool. So what we'll do is, let's see. So right now, we don't have any VMs. You can see there is a 0 over here, which means there are no VMs on this guy. So what we'll do is, we'll go and, I think we are ready. So we'll have to bring this particular node from the, out of the maintenance mode. So let's do that. Exit maintenance mode. Okay. So that will take few seconds. You can see that's happening here. Let's wait for that to finish. Alright, so we have exited the maintenance mode on this particular host, and I think we should be good to do the migration. So let's go to the firewall, right? And we'll right click and we'll click on migrate on here, right? So let's do that. Okay, there you go, migrate. So when you click on migrate, it's going to give you a bunch of options. Okay, let's do that again. I probably should have increased a little bit more memory on this particular host. I think I'm running it on 6 GB right now. Maybe 8 GB would have been a little faster. Okay. So, okay, I think it's still not come. So we'll have to wait. All right. On the migrate tab, what we're going to migrate is we are going to migrate only the compute resource. Okay, nothing else. All right. So we click on compute resource, go to the next. And here it will show us the various nodes onto which you can migrate. Obviously, we are interested in only this guy, right, which is the EXXI host 3. See, compatibility checks have succeeded. Let's click on next. And here, now this is very interesting, right? Because we are migrating, we need to be careful here. So we are migrating it to a host which has a distributed switch, right? Not a, I think on that host, we still have the standard switch. We haven't deleted it. That's why you can see these are visible. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to WAN to, the WAN, I'm going to retain it like that because I've not touched the WAN side, right? On the distributed switch, I've not changed the WAN. Whereas the management, I'm going to change to demanagement, and the DMZ, I'm going to change to DMZ, right? So these are the two adapters, or these are the two, let's say, port groups which are associated with my distributed switch. Whereas the WAN, I'm going to retain it as is because I'm not touching it. I'm not touching it on. I have not created a distributed switch for the vSwitch 1. I've created only for the vSwitch 0, right? So only these two changes. I'm going to say next, and I'm going to say schedule it right away. And there you go. I'm going to click on finish. So okay, did it start? I think something has started here. I'm going to say cancel. I think this was probably because I clicked it multiple times. Yeah, there you go, right? So you can see the vMotion has started. We can even start a continuous ping here on one of the hosts to see, if there is any ping drop. You should not actually see anything because vMotion is completely, there won't be any service down at all, right? The VMs are going to be kind of like moved from one host to other, or migrated from one host to other. at the same time, you know, there will be service, continuous service. So there you go. Right now it is happening. Okay, done. See, our vMotion is completed. Now if you go to if you go to my EXXi 3 here, and you can see the VMs against the VMs, you should see that the VM should be visible here, right? So the firewall has migrated from where? From the EXXi 1 to EXXi 3. Now similarly, if you want to continue with this, I mean, I'm not going to do it in this video because it's going to take a lot of time, but the next step is for you to migrate the vCenter as well, right? Take the vCenter and migrate it to EXXi 3, right? That way your EXXi 3 is going to have everything updated. It's going to have the distributed switch, right? And it is also going to have all the VMs in the corresponding distributed switch. So now you can then go back and do the same process which I did in this video for the rest of the 2 hosts, which is EXXi 1 and 2, right? And then once you have all the 3 hosts connected to or added to your distributed switch, then you are free to play around and build more VMs and do whatever you want, right? So, but again, I mean, you can still use a mixed match of standard switch and distributed switch, because that's what I'm using right now, right? I still have the vSwitch one. Actually, let's go and check that out. So if you go to, or maybe it's better to see here because this is quicker. So let's go to the networking section. And if you see here, actually, okay, we should actually see that only on this guy because we have added the switch only on this guy, right? So there you go. So you see there are 3 switches now. But on the vSwitch 0, you will basically not have anything, right? So you see there are no ports connected at all. Everything is empty, right? So you can even go and probably delete it from your from here actually. I mean, if you want, you can probably go to configure section, and under the vSwitch adapters or under the vSwitch section, I think it will load. Once it loads, under the vSwitch section, you can right click and you can delete the vSwitch 0 because it's no longer useful. Because we have, oh sorry, it's not on EXXi 1, sorry, on EXXi 3. If I go to configure, I think it's still loading, but yeah, that's one thing. You can probably go and delete the switch completely if you don't want it, right? Whereas on the D switch one, on the distributed switch one, we should start seeing the topology, the complete topology appearing here, right? You can see the DMZ zone, you can see the vMotion port adapter, port group, you can see the iSCSI port group, the management, everything has been connected here, right? So hope this was useful, guys. We kind of looked into something. We looked into the networking section of VMware, to be more specific. Right, we looked into the networking section of VMware in detail. In the previous video, we had looked into the standard switch. Excuse me, but in this video, we actually looked into the distributed switch, right? And we kind of did this completely where we kind of migrated, I mean, we had this particular VM, which is the firewall VM, which was currently on the EXXi 1 and it was on the standard switch. But what we did was we created the D switch on the vCenter, right? Because that's the place, that is the management console for creating your distributed switch. We created the switch there and we added this EXXi, in fact, we added EXXi 3, not 2. But we added EXXi 3 to that distributed switch, and then we migrated this VM using vMotion from this particular host to that particular host, EXXi 3, right? And it went smoothly because you can see the pings going in very nicely, right? So hope this was useful, guys, and obviously do come back for more videos on more fun stuff, right? Thanks a lot. Bye.